Okay, today I am off to find Kunlun Shan. Wish me luck. So the reason I say wish me luck is I am currently in Zibo, which is in Shandong province in China, but it's a part of the province where there are almost no Westerners. I actually bumped into someone else, actually from New Zealand, online, not in person, and chatting to her very briefly. She is living about half an hour from here, and she said, yeah, she hasn't seen a single foreigner while she's been here either, and no one who speaks a word of English, and neither have I. So it can make things a little bit more challenging, but of course you find a way. The other reason why I say wish me luck is no one really seems to know where this place is, and that doesn't surprise me greatly. My research on the internet, actually across several years, no one seemed to have a really good idea of where this place is either. I will probably talk about that a bit later, but for now I need to try catching a taxi and getting out there. So you may ask, why am I trying to go to this place which no one really seems to know about? The locals don't really seem to know about it. On the internet, no one really seems to know much about it. Well, for some years now, I have had a little personal goal of visiting all of the famous Kung Fu mountains in China. So there were 5 famous Kung Fu mountains, and I have been to 4 of them, Kunlun being the last one. So if it's a famous mountain, why don't people know about it? I might leave until I'm out of the taxi to talk about some more context around that. I'm not expecting to find much here, but you know, sometimes the only way to know something is to go there yourself and look for yourself. So I have found my way to Kunlun Shan, or the little town beside Kunlun Shan. Kunlun, so Shan means mountain. And let's see over there, let's see if we can, oh, can't zoom in that way. And over there you can't get a great view of it, but through there is Kunlun Shan. So I am going to see if I can find my way over there. Have a look at this. There are hundreds of these ladybirds flying around. At first I thought they were wasps or something, so I got out of there because they're all landing on me. But if it's ladybirds, that would generally be considered to be good luck, and there's hundreds of them here. Now those are some rustic picnic tables. So one warm, sweaty walk later, I have made it to the top of Kunlun Shan. And it was interesting coming up the mountain. I could definitely feel the energy becoming fresher and even the air becoming fresher, which I was quite surprised about. So not to be confused. So the air is of course part of the energy of a place, but there are other aspects as well. And not so surprising to me that the energy would become fresher going up the mountain, but looking around, I don't know if you can really see. Oh, you probably can in the camera. But there are actually some other hilltops sort of over there. You probably can't even see them. So the surrounding area, the air is really, really bad. But up here, it certainly feels and looks much, much, much clearer. So that was interesting. So I'm going to find a little spot to sit down and then talk more about some context around coming up Kunlun Shan. So if this is the famous Kunlun Shan, then why is it maybe that no one really seems to know about it? Well, the Chinese love to make lists, and lists of mountains. So there are the 5 Buddhist mountains. There are the 5 Taoist mountains. There's a list of the most beautiful mountains. And, 5's quite a popular number. There are the 5 famous Kung Fu mountains. And often there's crossover between these lists. So something can be both one of the famous Taoist and Buddhist mountains. We talked about how they have no problems having 2 things together at once, and so on. So the 5 famous Kung Fu mountains are Shan, Huashan, Songshan, Wudangshan, and Kunlun. Now it's possible that maybe only 4 of those mountains really had a lot of Kung Fu, and they wanted to round it out, so they chucked another 5th mountain in. I don't think that's likely, but that's possible. They wanted to make a list of 5. Such things do happen. But if we look at what do we actually find on those different mountains, that might help us to understand some things as well. And again, I have visited the other 4 famous mountains. If you go to Shan, you don't find any Kung Fu training there. It's you find some temples there, and you find some tourist things there, but no really Kung Fu training to speak of. If you go to Huashan, you don't really find any Kung Fu being trained there. Again, you find some tourist things, and some temples and things like that. And yet, once upon a time, the warriors from Huashan were the most feared swordsmen in all of China, and they served the emperors based in Xi'an. So clearly, historically, there was a lot of Kung Fu there, but there's not now. If you go to Songshan, Well, you definitely find Kung Fu being trained there, because that is where the famous Shaolin Temple is. Similarly, if you go to Shan, yes, you find temples and you find Kung Fu being trained there. But a lot of that is due to recent political history. At all of these mountains at different times, the temples have been wiped out and then rebuilt, and then wiped out again and then rebuilt. This has happened throughout history for different reasons. Sometimes through natural disaster. That's one of the things that affected the Huashan area in particular. Other times often due to politics, changes of power. Because these temples, much as in other parts of the world, a temple wasn't just a religious place, it was a place of learning. Often it was essentially like what we think of in modern times as a university. And so people went there not just for religious devotion, but to learn. And this was the case with martial arts as well. And so these temples acted as, they had real practical value to the people in the area, and often they would be affiliated with one political or group or one emperor or another, and when things changed, they'd get wiped out. And certainly this has happened in recent history as well. And it's really been in the last, recent history that Songshan and Wudangshan has been built up by the government here after having been wiped out, not too long before that. And so, they have built it up. And when I say recent history, I'm saying in the last 40 years, more or less. These have been built up, and they've been built up, well, partly as a matter of cultural pride, and then also for tourism. And so this is a big part of why these have been supported by the government, and you now see these quite thriving places of Kung Fu training there. It's not necessarily what would have originally been there, but it has been built up in recent times. But yet you go to Huashan, you go to Shan, you don't find any Kung Fu there. So for that reason, I'm not particularly surprised to not find any great evidence of any Kung Fu training here on Kunlun. It's really, in that sense, no different from Huashan or Shan. Now, it's not a very big mountain. Sometimes we think, mountain, it has to be huge. Some of those other mountains are significantly bigger than Kunlun, for sure, or this Kunlun. I'm going to talk more about that soon. But they're not huge mountains necessarily. Songshan is not a great, big, huge, tall mountain. So again, not overly surprised by that as well. Part of what makes it harder to identify exactly if this is in fact the famous Kunlun Shan or not is the fact that there are actually two Kunluns. There is this one in Shandong, and then there is the Kunlun mountain range, which is the great western mountain range, right to the west of China. Now, could that be the actual Kunlun, the famous Kunlun, where famous for Kung Fu? Possibly, but I'm going to give you a few reasons why not, and also a few reasons why this one could be. Now again, it's not going to be conclusive, but I'll give you a few reasons. Okay, for one, the Kunlun Shan, the Great Western Mountain Range, is far, far, far in the west of China, right by the Gobi Desert. It's 3,000 miles long, a huge range of mountains. It's right over by Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. And so ethnically, it's not very Chinese. And the Chinese really like to celebrate things that are very Chinese. They tend to think of other things as, well, things from elsewhere as being barbarians of a sort. And again, this is common to many old cultures, that anyone from outside their border is a barbarian. And so it seems a little bit unlikely that they would have one of their famous Kung Fu styles from there. as well as the fact that it's so far away. Now, I mentioned earlier that often the temples that were in these places had a practical purpose for learning and for training, and often had connections to different political movements or different emperors and different dynasties. And so the pattern for all of those other four Kung Fu mountains is that they're actually not too far from major population centers. And because if you're going to go to university, yes, you might travel, but it still needs to be somewhat accessible. And you also, to be successful, to have the support maybe that you need to be somewhat close to population centers to provide that support, and to those population centers that you have a relationship with. All of those other mountains, Ermei, Wudangshan, Huashan, Songshan. Yes, they're not in a major city, but they're sort of close enough that it wasn't too difficult for people to come and go from those cities. So from a practical point of view, that seems far more likely to me. In addition to this, the great western mountain range, Kunlun Shan. Well, the Chinese love to tell stories, as many cultures do. And it's quite common that they will mix fact with fiction. And the best way to maintain a fiction is for it to be too hard for people to actually check out for themselves. And so there are many stories, many myths based in the Kunlun Mountains. It's a place of gods and spirits and things like this. And so there are lots of stories about Kunlun. And so it's possible that maybe, wrapped up in that there were stories about Kung Fu coming from Kunlun as well. But again, that doesn't really fit the pattern. All of the other mountains were places that people could practically go to. It was very practical for someone to actually go and visit them, see them with their own eyes, train there, learn there. This was not so practical for Kunlun. This is part of the attraction of why myths often got attributed to Kunlun. It was this faraway place where no one actually ever, well, not no one, but almost no one actually went there. No one could go and verify things for themselves. In fact, again, I've researched this for several years, trying to get through so I could visit all 5 of these famous Kung Fu mountains. And when I talked to, someone from mainland China at one point about it, and I mentioned, I've been to this one, I've been to this one, I've been to this one, and I was talking about, and I still haven't been to Kunlun. I'm like, no, don't go to Kunlun. It's too hard. That's possibly something on the side of that Kunlun being the famed Kunlun, but there's also something against it. If Kunlun is a real place where real training took place, I think that's not so likely that it was that great western mountain range. So if this Kunlun, the one that I'm on right now, is the historical famous Kunlun, for Kung Fu at least, why might no one really know about it now? Well, one, there's this other Kunlun, so that distracts people's awareness of the name. 2, I suppose you notice some of the shots coming up here. It's right by an industrial part of the country. And so there's a lot of smog in the surrounding area and so on. It's going to be a lot harder if the government decided they wanted to build this up as a tourist and cultural area like they have for Songshan and Wudangshan. It would be a lot harder to do that here. Also, it's not nearly as an impressive a tall mountain as the others either. So that would count against it as well, and that's a reason why that kind of development isn't going to go on here. It just seems a lot less likely. So what are some factors, other than just some practical things, in favor of this being, the real Kunlun? Well, as I mentioned, the energy did become a lot fresher as I came up here, and the air became fresher. Those are pluses, which might point favorably towards this. Also coming up here, you might have noticed in a couple of the shots, there were, I didn't take too many shots of them, but quite a few graves coming up here. And so clearly the local people see this as somewhere with good feng shui. They recognize the good energy here, because this is something in the Chinese culture, or the ancient Chinese culture anyway, that you buried people where there were good feng shui, and that brought good fortune to your family, and so on. I think as well, the fact that it's a small mountain doesn't have to count hugely against it, because it's not really about the height of the mountain often, it's just the mountain needs to be higher than the surrounding area, which this certainly is. Again, it's close to a population center, and there is a Kung Fu style. Well, so there's a Kung Fu style named after Kunlun. Now, some of these Kung Fu styles are easier to find than others. Shaolin Kung Fu, it's not so hard to find. Again, a lot of that's due to, some older history, but more recent history as well. Wudang Kung Fu, a little bit harder to find, but you can find it there, and there is training actively going on those mountains. Mei, harder to find, but it is out there. I don't even know if you'd find it in China, but certainly you can find some people outside of China training Mei Kung Fu. Huashan, again, much harder to find. Again, don't know if you'll find it in China, but if you look hard enough, you might be able to find it outside of China. Because this is what happened as these different centers became, were wiped out and then rebuilt, wiped out at different points. Not everyone died normally when something was wiped out, but they left. They had to leave the area, forced migration, and they've established elsewhere in the world, including, outside of China. And then, Kunlun. There is a Kunlun Kung Fu style that some people practice. Not easy to find. And I have, in my research, looking for where is this Kunlun, found people referring to the fact that, in their opinion as well, there's a good chance that it actually refers to the Kunlun in Shandong, not the Kunlun, the sort of more mythical Kunlun in the Great Western Mountains. So none of this is conclusive. So if this isn't conclusive, how do I feel about my visit? What's the point of it? Well, to some extent, it's ticking a box. Just to some extent, I did want to visit all 5 of the Kung Fu mountains. Having visited 4, I really wanted to see the 5th. And technically speaking, even if the real Kunlun is in the Western Mountain Range, I did visit that on this trip as well. I visited Urumqi, which is sort of right by there, and that is the home, ethnically of the Uyghurs. I don't know if I said that right, but again, not like the rest of China, ethnically quite different. I think I've got a shot of me flying over some of those mountains somewhere out of the plane, so I'll see if I can put that in here. So technically, one way or another, I visited Kunlun. Am I disappointed that I didn't find any Kung Fu here? Well, it would have been cool if I did. Absolutely. I'm not surprised, even if I had have found more in the way of temples and things like that. I'm not surprised that I didn't find Kung Fu, and I wasn't particularly expecting to find some Kung Fu here. Because again, don't really find that in Mei or Huashan either. So why did I do it? Well, ticking a box, but also sometimes you just don't know until you look for yourself. That's true of many things. And sometimes when you go looking, sometimes you don't really find anything. Sometimes you find a mystery. And sometimes you find a real gem. And sometimes you just find some things that clarify for you and sort out misconceptions that you might have. And that is definitely true of many things in China. Certainly, as I visited some of the other mountains, gone to different places, you can have lots and lots of ideas about a place, but it's very different to actually go there and see it for yourself. And I think this is true of, many people, well, within China, but also outside of China, definitely outside of China. They often get very romanticized ideas about different places and things in China, and homes of Kung Fu, homes of Qigong. If you want a practical understanding, if you want to really understand it, you've got to see the practical reality of it for yourself. And so I always try to make that a point. I always, when I'm teaching Qigong, talking about things, I try to talk about what I know, not just what I've been told. If it's something I've been told, I'll say, this is what people say, or things like that. But I try to talk from experience, because in my opinion, Qigong should not be a mythical thing. It's fine if people want to have stories and things, but sometimes if we make it mythical, it can distract from the reality, because people will either discount it because it's a myth, or they'll go chasing a myth rather than chasing the reality. And the reality is awesome enough by itself. And so, I really like to check things for myself, verify things for myself, do things for myself to find out the reality of things. And I think people tell me that comes across in my teaching, that when I teach Qigong, it's a real and a practical thing. It's very much traditional, tied to all of the traditional concepts, philosophies, theories, but in a practical way, not just in a theoretical, mythical, made-up story kind of way. So my visit isn't quite over yet. I will do a bit of Qigong here so I can tune into the energy a little bit more. And then I'm also, is there another ladybird? I'm also going to go and have a little bit more of an explore around the surrounding area and the town. Who knows what I might find there. I'm probably also going to turn my phone off because for some reason my battery is just going down really, really fast. And I want to make sure that I have access to it later on when I need to try to go back to my hotel for any assistance that I may need. So anyway, hopefully this has been an interesting video for you. Certainly it's what I'm up to. I'm sharing what I'm up to. Again, sometimes it's a mixed bag what you find. Sometimes you find a mystery, sometimes you find a real gem. Maybe I'll yet find some more interesting things. But one way or another, I hope you enjoyed the vlog, and hopefully you continue to follow the rest of them, as I am going to be going to some, some places where there's more guaranteed to be some things that are going to be visually interesting, historically interesting, a little bit later on in my trip.